Okay. Hey Jeff, how are you? Good, how are you? Yeah.
Where's that?
Because he counts just one of the 2 days.
Can we just turn it around? Did you see last time? You want to face into the podium, right?
That camera or the?
It's this thing. I don't know, that one's not on, it's this one.
So it's hard. I know we were, you know, there's a couple weeks ago.
So whenever they come, whenever the people speak here, just turn it on. Hopefully now I'll put it back.
Hey, Ross, how are you? Okay. 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 Yeah. You know, I could wear these. Part of the money. I'm sure curious. Right. It's just to be recorded, will this be put online as well?
Yeah, so the goes to the YouTube channel, and it's live right now, and it'll be recorded and saved to Gmail.
Cool. Thank you.
And this is gonna be.
When you speak to them around the globe, either. You see. Oh. Right.
Is that okay? Just my name and address? Or- Thank you.
Right, yeah. Well, that's there. I don't understand why. Yeah. Because it doesn't just, good level. Everybody else switched it. Yeah, I think that. We could ask them. Yes. Yeah. Right.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of my fellow commissioners and myself, I'd like to welcome you to the Plan Commission, Facility Plan Commission meeting for February 2nd, 2023. And tonight, again, the Board of Trustees has tasked the Plan Commission with development of a recommendation for affordable housing policy, which will be delivered by the end of the first quarter of this year. To this end, the Plan Commission convened a listen and learn session at our January 19th meeting, where we heard from subject matter experts, members of the public on affordable housing. The content of these presentations can be found on www.skokie.org hashtag or slash housing. At that meeting, the village also launched an email address, housing@skokie.org, to collect feedback on housing policy issues in the village. Tonight, we will review a summary of some of the ideas we heard at the listen and learn session and start a which will help formulate our recommendations. Staff has prepared a memo and materials that include a recommended framework and suggest development of goals and affordable housing. In terms of the plan for this evening, let's review the document and materials of staff and discuss. And once we have reviewed this document, we'll take public comment. And then we'll give staff direction on the next steps that we need to take. And what we'd like to see at our next meeting on March 2nd. So we are prepared to provide a recommendation to the board at the March 20th meeting. So, without further ado, first order of business is to ratify the minutes from the last meeting. By the motion to approve, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Minutes have been approved. Okay, Johanna, do you want to take the forefront?
Good evening, Johanna Knighton, Community Development Director. I'm joined tonight by Paul Reese from Community Development, as well as Justin Malone. We put the staff memo into a PowerPoint that we thought might help facilitate the discussion. Happy to go through this if the Plan Commission would like to pause and we can discuss as we go, or we can continue through the thing and then bounce back around. It's supposed to be organic among the members having session. So we took a stab at creating a bit of a framework to help guide a recommendation. And the first was setting goals. What do we want to be? Where do we want to go with this recommendation? So, but also we need to understand what the need is. We heard a lot of great ideas and concepts from the presenters in January, and what is something that might fit well for what Skokie needs, and what is our population that needs housing. The next was creation of new housing. Are there changes or ways in which we can help facilitate and create an environment where new housing that is affordable is developed? And then also invest in existing housing. We have a rich housing stock that in some cases needs additional rehabilitation, additional investment. How do we facilitate that as a municipality, but also how do we engage more partners to help bring improvements to our existing housing while making sure it stays affordable, it doesn't become unaffordable to people. And then finally, funding affordable housing. How do we identify funding that maybe uses gap financing for developers or for the programs that the village might want to offer? So before we advance, I'd pause if there's any questions or if you guys want to talk about this before we move on.
By the way, there is a sign-up sheet on the table to my left here. And if you sign up, give us your email address or phone number, we'll notify you of any events that occur after this meeting, and we'll be notified as to the next meeting.
Let's go to the next one. All right, so this flushes out the undertake a housing needs studies, analysis and reporting. We obviously have a deep plethora of data on what we have in our community and what data exists on incomes, number of units. But we also have the opportunity to maybe talk to some populations in Skokie that to better understand the needs. There was an example I spoke to a developer before the meeting, and there was a suggestion that thinking about how does with the population that goes to school at Oakton here in Skokie, what kind of housing needs do they have? How are those students residing in our community? Better understanding different workers that come to our community, where are they living? How far do they commute? Getting some of that kind of anecdotal information that the data from the census might not glean. So understanding what those groups might need helps guide and informs the village's understanding of the greater housing need. So we believe that undertaking a better study and analysis and outreach would yield better results over the long term. All right, next, the comprehensive plan. We just updated the environmental chapter, and we've adopted sustainability plan, and that will further inform and update our comprehensive plan. But the housing sections, the sections that deal with housing is also a portion that we would recommend needs changes and updates at some point. So this is another big piece because it signals to the development community, anybody who wants to do business with the village, what are our priorities and what is our vision for housing. It's the government's way, our local government's way to signal how we want to see our goals carried out. Next up, the investment in existing housing. We have a housing rehab program through our community development block grant with the goal to help owner occupied housing for homeowners to improve their housing, maintain their homes, sustain the quality of their homes, invest in them so hopefully lower energy bills, make their homes safe and habitable. And we've been running this program for many years and are looking to make some improvements, but really what we think is probably a nice cornerstone of our housing policy is this investment in existing housing. We have an aging housing stock, making sure that we're investing in that housing, using the programs that we have, like the community development block grant, but also perhaps looking for other funding sources to help expand opportunities to other households that might need that. Similar to the housing rehab program, we have the neighborhood housing program, which we're currently in pilot years of engaging, but this is something that we're hoping to target to some of the more multifamily homes, to 2- and 4-unit owner occupied buildings, as well as maybe some of the townhomes around Skokie that may need improvements that are beyond just a single owner occupied unit. That might be exterior work, roofing work, tuck pointing, driveway. The idea was suggested that electric charging stations, improvements that individual unit owners might not undertake, but as a group, we could help provide money for the neighborhood and improve parts of Skokie. Next, thinking about homeownership programs, it's not just about how we go buy homes, but helping make sure people have the access to homeownership opportunities, financial literacy, home counseling. I think one big piece of homeownership also is helping people understand how much home they can afford. People have an idea of where they want to live, or what kind of home they might want to have, but it may not match where they are financially. So helping them better understand where those opportunities are, but also make sure they understand what commitments are involved in preparing for homeownership. So the counseling piece, but also finding opportunities to take homes that may not be ready to be purchased, but maybe rehabbing those and bringing those into opportunities where we can do community land trusts, or finding partners who can help facilitate these things. So this is probably a longer term opportunity, but one that we can start to look at now. Accessory dwelling units. We've received quite an interest from for people interested in accessory dwelling units. And accessory dwelling units can be inside a home or accessory to carriage house, coach house style homes detached from the building, but often we find that people have created internal ADUs, which are conversion of a basement unit and rented out, often not legally or in a safe way. So this represents an opportunity to manage this from a zoning perspective, as well as making sure that the building code is applied to these kinds of properties, so people have safe housing too. Inclusionary housing. This is something that is used often to ensure that new development has affordable housing on site with certain and makes certain requirements, whether they're on site or fee in lieu of on site units. An example of when you might see a fee in lieu would be for a townhome development, for example. It's often or even some condominium developments, because assessments add an extra cost to the housing that for an ownership. So often and those are costs that over time may not be able to be well controlled. So that's some I've seen that application in townhomes where you do a fee in lieu and not provide on-site for sale units. We'll go to the next slide. But I wanted to highlight what there'll be, we'll talk a little bit more about it, and several of the presenters last time talked about area median income. So I wanted to show everybody really quickly this table. Everyone memorize a square and a number here. But the idea here is the household incomes are based on different area median incomes for the Chicago, Naperville, Joliet, Illinois, HUD metro area. So this is a broader area. We have to think beyond just Skokie's borders for the income. Certainly, we have certain housing conditions here, but the way in which we talk about affordability is on a region. So these different income levels are based on different household sizes and different income levels. And this is what Chicago uses. They've broken out income levels at a higher point to 100% and 120% of AMI, seeking to get often what's called the missing middle, which is a higher income yet still meets affordability challenges in this region. So I just wanted to make everyone aware of this semi-complicated yet also quite straightforward chart of how incomes are broken out. And then to do a little math on inclusionary housing. So one piece of inclusionary housing is the partnership and the agreement from within the development community. And I've worked in a community that had an inclusionary housing ordinance, and often it takes a little bit of developer education and making sure that you have a partner in that exercise, and that they don't shy away from opportunities to do affordable housing on site, but also understanding that we have to make sure, if this is in communities that do this, that you're not financially constraining so much as to discourage development. So particularly right now, there's a lot of financial challenges that are outside of our control as a municipality or developer control: taxes, construction costs, and real estate market conditions. And I will hone in on construction costs, especially because just in the past 6-8 months, I've seen significant changes in construction costs that are deeply impacting development in this region. So that is a very, very serious challenge to our development community right now. But then our presenters at the last meeting talked a lot about TIF and low-income housing tax credits and housing choice vouchers that can be helpful in facilitating making sure that the incomes are met, or that gaps are filled, or that developments can take place. But some of those things are still limited. Not all of the Village of Skokie is in a TIF district. Not every project is going to be eligible for tax credits. So, and there are a limited number of housing choice vouchers. Now, those are not necessarily part of the inclusionary housing pro forma, but they're things that help shorten the gap a little bit. Then finally, along with inclusionary housing, considering parking requirement reductions or increasing the density, allowed density, things like that help make a development more feasible, and are things to consider if this group does decide to make any kind of recommendation. But just to show you a little bit of how the numbers might work out, and this is when we start to talk. Right now, the village doesn't have an inclusionary housing ordinance, but when we've talked with developers about including affordable units, we often are met with, I don't know if I can make this financially work right now, because I've made certain development decisions based on what the rules are and the code is. And this is an example here is $2,700. We're going to assume this is a 2-bedroom unit, $2,700. per month. For the income limits for an 80% of area median income 4-person household, and the area median income of 60% area median income for a 4-person household. You can read those numbers up there, it's about 83,000 and 62,000. So those are the rents, the maximum rent, the limits there. And so you have a gap. What the developer's trying to get for that 2-bedroom, you have a $617 gap and an almost a little bit more than $1,100 gap for those 2 units. So for the developer to provide those units, those income levels, that's the potential loss that team is taking. So let's go to the next slide. So looking at this from a longer term perspective and a bigger, and this is just income, this doesn't include taxes or expenses or anything else, it's just straight income. You'll see if you take some different scenarios, you assume a certain percentage of, this is we're going to assume 100-unit building, which is probably kind of small for a brand new building, but let's just, for the sake of round numbers, let's go with that. So 100 units, at one end, you have almost 3.2 and 2 million in income. And you start, let's assume a 30% affordable scenario. You get 2.9%. That's a straight split between 80 and 60% of AMI for those 30 units. And as you go down, as you go down in percent of affordability, you go up in income. So you get to 50% of affordable, 15 units, another split, you get 3 million in income. 10% affordable, would put 10 units, 5 at 80 and just at 5 at 60, your income goes up a little bit. So looking at the market rate difference between those, that's a lot of money for the year. Add it to 10 years, when these developers go to try to finance their projects with the banks and those lenders, investors have a harder time saying, oh, I don't know if I can do this. So you get the 10-year impact. This is not correcting for time value of money or any kind of rent escalations. This is the simplest math I try to do here. This is what the developer is looking at in terms of what the income reductions would be over the course of time. So I'll tell you, developers don't always say no to these things, but they don't always say yes. And it's not because they don't want to be helpful and put these units in. It's because financially they have investors and other people that make that a little bit more challenging to say yes to. So the guidance I would offer here is that if you move forward with this, is to make sure you think of something that makes it easier, more realistic to be palatable to, not just thinking about how you get to a yes instead of a push, instead of something that makes no development happen. So I will pause because that's a lot of numbers information. Are there any questions? The planning commission.
Commissioner, any questions?
So,
Just Jeff?
so I'm sorry to have that. So based on where Skokie is at currently, we're roughly at 15%. Is that correct?
So we don't require any affordable housing right now.
Where are we relative to, I've heard numbers and even in all the comments, we're talking about a percentage of the Skokie's Act, 19%.
So the overall, the available housing in Skokie, 20% of all the housing units are considered, almost 30% are considered affordable, meeting the state guidelines. So this, where we
With no ordinance currently, we're at roughly 19%.
make them right now.
Thank you.
Any other question?
All right, so then this is something that, again, put under the column of things we're starting to work on. The sustainability plan identified looking at underutilized paved areas and incentivize the conversion to sustainable green space or infill development. So this is another opportunity if these are sites that look good for housing, utilize these and make targeted efforts to make sure these parcels are inclusive of affordable housing and pursue developments that could even be available for tax credit projects. Okay, and then finally we get to the portion of how to think about funding some of these things. So looking at the payment in lieu of affordable housing units, this is something that inclusionary housing ordinances have employed if developers want to pay upfront for a fee per unit that they would not be, so there's a 10% requirement for affordable housing in a development. 10% of the units, if a portion of the units are not going to be on site, then there would be a per unit fee assessed. If you do it time of occupancy or a permit or some interval that would be payable to the municipality. Major home alteration fee. So there's communities that have a demolition, affordable housing demolition fee. You tear down an entire house. You have to build a bigger home that has a different affordability level. You pay a fee that would go into that would cover the loss of that housing, or a major alteration fee. You put on a large addition to a home or take down half of your home. That would then be a fee would be assessed if you did something more than added or subtracted 50% of the existing housing. With the idea being if you bought a $200,000 small 2-bedroom 1-bath house, post-war home, and you on a big lot, you turn it into a $750 million home. That's the fee that would be assessed. Vacation rental fee, we're starting to see an uptick in Airbnbs and VRBOs. In Skokie, we're getting frankly quite a lot of complaints because there's concerns about the relationship that those vacation homes have to the rest of the neighborhood. People don't like the coming and going of people, and it's also not always, people don't always know the rules about garbage pickup or parking. So it does add a little bit of stress to the neighborhood. But it's also, that's another home that's not in the regular housing circulation. So assessing a fee, creating a special use process to make sure we're managing that process would be an option that could help fund affordable housing. Vacant building registry. Skokie currently only requires vacant commercial properties to be registered. Well, we could start to require vacant commercial properties to be registered. Again, the village gets complaints about homes that have sat vacant for a period of time that are not for sale. Perhaps somebody's family owns it. They've been sitting vacant for a bit, and a bit of a blight on the neighborhood. But this would push a fee, so people have to be accountable to these properties, but also making sure that the village staff are getting in there to make sure that they're safe, that the unit also is protected for future habitability. Hopefully, many of these buildings last very long periods of time, making sure that they're well maintained is exactly what many of the staff in the community development department do on a regular basis to make sure the buildings that we have in this community are safe and last long.
Can I ask a clarification on that? It seemed like you suggested traditional residential homes, but I thought you said commercial spaces. Did I misunderstand?
So right now, the village only
Right.
monitors commercial spaces.
Right.
We don't monitor residential spaces.
Residential generically, you use the word building, so were you referring to?
I was referring to like a structure, like a building, any kind. So even if it was
A single family home would qualify.
Absolutely, a single family home, a 2-flat that somebody bought and hasn't rented or occupied.
So I raise this issue because this is one that's particularly interesting to me. It doesn't take you to walk very long on trash day to see all the trash cans that are not in front of single family homes. Let alone the alleyways where, you know, our waste haulers have physically turned those cans over because they're quite aware that no one lives there. I'm curious as to whether or not there was any discussion to go further with regard to unoccupied single family homes. If we're saying we don't have a sufficient inventory of affordable housing, and yet you walk 1.5 miles and you can count 20 such properties that are sitting vacant, I really question whether a registration fee is sufficient. Whether or not there should be some discussion about, you know, requiring property owners that are essentially banking that inventory to actually upgrade those properties or do something more over time if they're not going to put them on the market or make them available for rent.
I think all those things. When we know something is vacant, we can also make sure the upkeep is proper. We can, I mean, it's, when things sit vacant, we can say, make sure you're cutting your grass, make sure you're,
That's a requirement under the building.
yeah, absolutely, but when we know where where those homes are, we can better monitor them, so we can put those on the milk route, so to speak.
And I guess what I'm suggesting is I think we already know because our waste haulers know.
Some of them, yeah, some of them do. We also know that sometimes people put garbage in their neighbors' cans
But
because,
it goes more.
yeah, but you're right, there are ways we know. And syncing those things up, but it's also an opportunity to get get some movement on people registering their property so we can keep it. And it's also a good thing for police and fire. I mean, it's across the municipality, there's a lot of good information that can be gleaned so we can make sure our housing is maintained.
Okay, while I'm interrupting, I have one more question. It was on the prior slide. It was in reference to. Could we go back a slide? I'm sorry.
Is this
Oh,
one?
this is it?
Yeah.
Vacation rentals,
No, maybe it was one more. I'm sorry.
major home alteration.
Major home alteration. This is the one I'm curious about as well. So I completely understand the tear down. I have no questions about that. That makes perfect sense. I'm curious though about the major home renovation, if that is potentially penalizing multi-generational homes. So again, we heard a lot of testimony the last time we were here about the fact that Skokie's population is aging. I certainly have experienced this on more than one occasion in my own family, where you create essentially dwelling units inside your homes that have been modified so that someone who is physically incapable of traveling the steps they once did, you modify your home to accommodate that. Sometimes that's so someone can stay in their home, and sometimes that's so that they can live in that home with other family members and caregivers. So I'm just curious as to whether, if we look at the major home renovation, it needs to be a little bit more nuanced. Like, are we installing a pool and a guest house, or are we converting a space so that someone with a disability can put a lift or an elevator in their home, or take out the stairs completely? Just any comments for the record.
So I'm happy to answer any questions. That completes the run through of the staff memo.
Any questions from staff? Staff report? All right, at this time, open for the public comments. I believe, the checker, we asked for time. Make a presentation. And told him to give us your name and that, information.
You can just do the arrows.
Okay. Great. Thank you. I'm Gail Schechter, 9033B Keating, and I'm joined by Charlie Sachs and Judy Mendel as Skokie Neighbors for Housing Justice. So thank you for having us. I just want to mention that Skokie Neighbors for Housing Justice is a grassroots group of Skokie residents. We believe that Skokie deserves a unified housing policy that meets human needs and promotes community. And while we appreciate the village's initiative, a quote, affordable housing policy must be evaluated more broadly as part of a larger consideration of housing for people of all incomes and backgrounds. And I'll briefly turn it over to Judy. Oh, yes.
I wanted to talk to why mixed income housing matters. Mixed housing strengthens the fabric of our community where neighbors of all backgrounds can interact. It provides for the Skokie we want to be: inclusive, diverse, equitable, just, environmentally sustainable. A diversified housing market benefits all. It fosters civic engagement. When neighbors can interact with each other, they're more committed to their neighborhoods and the village. It contributes to a cleaner environment and improved public health. Less driving, less pollution, less wear and tear on roads, less strain on our bodies. Mixed income housing matters. It also improves the local economy and closes the jobs housing gap. so that people who are working here can also live here. And doing mixed income housing recognizes that the housing crisis and imbalance is a regional and statewide concern requiring every community to cooperate. And I hope Skokie can be a leader and not a follower in that.
Thanks, Judy. I want to mention that we wrote a memo. I have copies here that it's gone to the Plan Commission, and we have copies here for anybody who wants to read it. We'll also send it to the village board. I'm going to dash us through the problems and then the solutions. So the main thing that we wanted to emphasize here is there's two things. What are the gaps for people who already live in Skokie? And then what are the gaps for people who want to rent or buy in Skokie? What we found is that existing households earning under $50,000 a year are the most burdened. They're paying more than 30% of their income in housing just to stay put. That's over 5,400 households, or 1 in 4 Skokie households. In fact, 35% of all Skokie households of any income are paying more than 30% of their incomes for housing. I should mention that it's 76% of renters earning under 50,000 are in this category, and 80% of homeowners are in this income level. So we feel this is a population that needs attention. Skokie workers can't afford housing in the village. Median income is around $42,000. The starting wage of a school district 69 staff person is $43,000 a year. However, the average rent in Skokie is about $1,800 a month, which requires a $70,000 a year income, and a home with a median price of $331,000 requires an income of $84,000. So there's a gap here, both in the supply and the demand. Special populations, I mean, you'd mentioned about intergenerational housing, multi-generational housing. There's about 1% of those, I estimate, in Skokie that require accommodation that is not sufficient at this point. And then there's about 13% of Skokie has disabilities, which have the double whammy of both affordability and accessibility. The other thing, property taxes, utilities, fees continue to rise. That's something I hope that the Plan Commission will look at, some analysis of that. I want to mention as well, let's see, this, I wanted to show you this in particular. This is the table that shows you why $50,000. You can see there's a real cliff as people, either renters or homeowners, go up on the income scale. They're living much more affordably within their means. You know, again, 65% of those paying over 30% of their income for housing are those earning under $50,000. This is the latest census data. I also want to emphasize, you know, you're talking about the 19.9% that's affordable, but in fact, you know, it doesn't say anything about who lives in these units, what are the incomes, and what are the shelter burdens. And over the years, you can see between 2000 and 2021, and granted there's inflation, but the village at this point is 30% under 50,000 a year. It used to be 43%. And this is why, as you'll see later, we feel that new housing to keep an income balance should be at least 30% affordable. And then I already talked here about the workers. And then also the importance of, you'll notice on 2020, the above slide or table, African Americans are the one racial group where the majority of that ethnic group is renters. So we want to be mindful that we want to be mindful to keep the racial mix. I'm going to pass it over to Charlie.
Good evening. My name is Charlie Sachs. I'm a 20-year resident of Skokie and also a member of the Sustainable Environment Advisory Commission, on which I've served since 2015. I am thrilled, let me just say, I'm thrilled, the Plan Commission and the Village Board of Trustees have initiated this process of examining the issues of affordable housing in Skokie. And I appreciate the opportunity to work with Gail and the Skokie Neighbors of Housing Justice and to be able to speak before the Plan Commission this evening. I'm also encouraged by the staff memo and the level of discourse about the nature of affordable housing in Skokie. I think this is an important conversation, and I'm glad we're headed in this direction. Gail has outlined a demographic and an economic data, which has given us a profile of housing characteristics of the village. I'm going to speak quickly to some of the physical conditions of our housing stock and the regulatory context of our zoning and building codes. As you can see from this slide, there are some general physical conditions of Skokie's housing and infrastructure that have significant impact on sustainability, resilience, and affordability. Skokie's housing infrastructure are aging. Built during the rapid post-war expansion of the 1950s, many of our building and underlying infrastructure are approaching 70 years of age and require expensive maintenance and repairs. And some of these things, some of the slide outlines some of the implications, particularly 2 to 4 units. And one of the things I want to talk about is, or emphasize, is some of the existing homeowners and also the small property owners that are impacted by this. Complicating these physical conditions, Skokie's zoning and building requirements often make it difficult to update housing stock to adapt to changing economic, demographic, and environmental conditions, and end up suppressing the regenerative investment necessary to meet present and future needs. I can speak to this personally as someone who's done some work on their house, multiple projects in remodeling and also adding solar panels and just doing basic things like putting in a new deck. That Skokie's building process is sometimes onerous and not really clear what is trying to be achieved by that.
Can you speak to that? Please be more specific. Can you give an example?
I'll give it a very specific example. My house is a prototypical 3-bedroom bungalow that was built in the 1950s. When I went to update it, and this is not necessarily affordable option, but it was an adaptive one, right? I wanted to add a second floor to meet our changing family requirements. It required a variance because the house was no longer not conforming to the zoning code. My house did nothing. The zoning code changed, and that introduced a process that was expensive, complex, and uncertain. And for a smaller individual homeowner or a smaller property owner, that sometimes pushes that kind of modification and adaptation across the boundary to unacceptable risk. That's an example of it. Over and over again, I hear and talk to other people with similar kind of situations. I want to do something, and it's like I can't get into the door, or there's so many things that are uncertain, or there's so many requirements that I don't fully understand, and then they just drop out of it.
Mr. Schechter, can you start wrapping up your presentation?
Yeah, sure. Let me go to the next slide. In our initial conversation, Skokie Neighbors for Housing Justice has identified several statutory and policy areas of concern based on experience of residents and service providers in the community, which are presented here on the slide, and you can read through them. These are not intended to be exhaustive or comprehensive, but a starting point for further analysis and investigation. Some of these items are addressed directly in the environmental sustainability plan recently adopted by the village. For example, the land use and housing section of the sustainability plan recommends a top-level strategy to update community plans, zoning, and design standards to increase housing and community resilience to the impacts of climate change. These are policy priorities that have already been adopted by the village as part of the sustainability plan. However, I would caution that the sustainability plan cannot and should not serve as a proxy for a cogent housing policy. What we are presenting tonight is a framework for a housing policy that articulates a vision and outlines the specific priorities and actions to promote more affordable and sustainable housing. It is an important and sound body of work, and I credit Gail to this, representing a comprehensive and strategic approach for the sustained efforts over time. Gail will present some of the specific recommendations for next steps. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlie. We'll be really quick on this.
Okay.
In fact, that is pretty much the last slide after all the people who signed on to this. So our recommendations are, what you're hearing is a unified housing plan, all populations, because what affects one will affect all. The second is to develop a set of criteria and a scoring system for your commission. So looking at things like, favoring things that are infill development rather than sprawl, a wider range of affordability, a variety of housing types, clustering near public transit. Is this housing that will be provided in an integrated manner, or will it separate people? Will it alleviate the region's housing stress in terms of the jobs housing mismatch, or exacerbate it? So these are just some of the criteria you might look at. Then next, assisting Skokie household. Remember, 35% of our households are housing burdened. So, but especially those under $50,000 a year, maybe a subsidy for rents, mortgage costs, or property taxes. Even the village of Wilmette has something called Housing Our Own, which is a special subsidy for seniors and people with disabilities, funding home repair for seniors, for home modifications, etc. The next dedicated fund, create a dedicated fund, which Johanna spoke to assist not only in development, but to assist residents, landlords, developers, and even first-time home buyers. Next, this is the inclusionary zoning. We feel that 30%, since if we want to mirror the economic diversity of the village, that should be the set aside. And we're suggesting the 50% AMI level, not the 60%, because again, that's where the need is. However, though, on the home ownership, obviously you could go a little bit higher, maybe the 80%, but the rental at 50% AMI at least. If the problem that Johanna cited about, making the numbers work, the village could do things like density bonuses and things like that. Working with, if you have a stock of empty vacant houses, work with the community land trust to acquire those homes. Next is ensuring that all new and existing housing is environmentally sustainable and improve safety and affordability, increase housing options for people with disabilities, because again, they have that double whammy, boost tenant protections, something like a landlord tenant ordinance, align village hall infrastructure with all these goals. So we might even create a housing commission, have a staff person who's an ombudsman for housing. Also looking at, language, being able to manage the various language needs among residents. And then finally, building a culture of community. So making sure that, incorporate housing diversity as a hallmark of Skokie welcomes everyone, provide education and outreach to bolster respect for all people, and even looking at conflict resolution methods like mediation. I would beef up some of the work that's tasked to the Human Relations Commission. So we thank you for listening to us. We did what we could to, try to get turnout, and we're glad to hear that this is an ongoing process.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else who'd like to welcome? Comment?
Good evening, everyone. Samina Hussain from District 219, part of the Communications Department and the Strategic Partnerships Coordinator. I just wanted to come back because I had spoke last time and I gave you some figures, but I did bring up, get some new figures from the district. We did have a number of students that qualified for free and reduced lunch meals. It's at 28.6%. And that's 1,416 students. This is the total of the NALS North and NALS West. And then 2% or 79 students are the total are homeless and unhoused. And in District 219, we have about 5 centers that where students and their families reside in Skokie. 3 of them are entirely from Skokie. That would be 73.5, 73 or 73.5, 73, and I believe 72. Fairview. 68 and 69 have, a portion that, are Skokie residents. So we must also keep that in mind, that some of these, students that are attending the centers, they may not have, children that are in the high school yet, who may fall in those categories. I know Jeff and I, we work closely with, the Education Foundation, and we have helped some families who are facing these, housing challenges. So I just wanted to make sure that I gave you some of those updated figures and just to keep that in mind. Thank you.
Thank you.
Change that real quick.
You do everything I need to do.
Hi, I'm Kimberly Polka. I've lived here a long time. The 19% came up again. I'm wondering if we could get clarification on what year that number is from. It's my understanding that that number is from 2016. I think it's important to point out, well before a lot of luxury housing developments have been approved with no affordable housing. If I'm wrong, I'd be happy to be corrected on that, but I don't think that 19% that we keep talking about is even a current number. 2016 was a long time ago. I'm also going to say something that I hope doesn't get me in trouble. Gail did a wonderful presentation. I have been to the Skokie Neighbors for Housing Justice meetings. I do consider myself to be a part of that group. There were 3 people up here today speaking on behalf of dozens of Skokie residents, and to rush them along or make them feel like they are limited on their time when we, like you, are volunteering our time, meeting in the background because we care about this issue, makes me feel like, and I'm sure gives the impression to others, when there was not the same time constraints put on people who were here last week. We are your residents. We are the stakeholders. And I would just like to put out there really briefly, and I promise I'll never say Carvana in this room again. My very first experience with the Plan Commission was January 6th, 2021. I watched that meeting again, and I was cut off when I was speaking as a resident after hours of Carvana giving their presentations. Developers are given a platform to talk as much as they want. This is the appearance from one of your residents. Your developers are given the utmost respect, but to tell 3 people who are speaking on behalf of over 30 in a letter.
There is a reason for that.
No,
let me explain.
I'm telling you what it looks like to me. Is this public comment or is this your comment?
Listen.
You're doing it right now. Is this your village, our village, or my village?
You're spreading a falsehood. Okay.
I can't be spreading a falsehood when I'm talking about what the appearance is to me. That is actually not possible. You're actually doing what the mayor does at board meetings. This is not a time for, I didn't ask for an explanation. This is public comment, is it not?
Not public comment, because you're spreading misinformation. Can I explain myself?
I mean, I guess I have to let you or you're not going to stop. Because you just told me this is not the time for public comments.
Plan Commission, you want to listen to this or not?
Am I standing like this? I mean, should we just go back and forth? You want to go outside?
When the petitioner asked for a hearing before the Plan Commission, it is his presentation. He has paid a fee to be there. And he is entitled to the maximum amount of time he needs for this presentation.
Okay.
It is his.
Okay, so that explains Carvana. So now that we're in a debate or in a court of law or whatever you want it to be, who paid a presentation fee last week?
That is not.
I'm telling you that I'm just trying to tell you as Mr. Luke, I am trying to tell you as a resident, the appearance that it gives when you put a time limit and rush along, especially after a commissioner asked a question. And Charlie Sachs was answering the question, and then you rush along the presentation. I am not I am not asking for an explanation. I am telling you the impression that it creates, and it's not the first time that impression has been created. I understand your explanation. You could probably go and give me an explanation for every single scenario, but I am saying as a whole, I've watched a lot of meetings since January 6th. As a whole, I feel like it makes me feel like sometimes there is pomp and circumstance and question what is really happening, because I don't feel like the residents are given the same respect as somebody else. And that is all I'm saying. That is the perception it's creating to me. It is just for your information. I don't need an explanation.
Hi, my name is Alice Pappas. I'm an 18-year resident of Skokie. I work with one of our local school districts welcoming new families. I work with a lot of refugee families. And I just wanted to share that nearly all of them are working $15, $16, $17 an hour jobs and are not bringing home probably more than about $2,400 a month. So they're having severe difficulty making ends meet in making their rent. I have one gentleman that's using his food money to actually try and pay his rent. And I just wanted to share that in the course of my work, living and working in the community, there are several of these refugee families that I just wanted to make you aware of. Without putting this on the backs of 2, 3, 4 flat landlords, let's make an equitable guideline for large multifamily developments. Let's keep our our community diverse, not only racially and ethnically, but also economically. My mom grew up on the South Side and had a friend in the late 1940s or 50s who was a young Jewish boy, and he was so excited to move here to Skokie. He was going to meet his family here that had survived the Holocaust. That family came here, was welcomed here. Can we not do that again? To be a community for all? And I know we can. Thank you.
Thank you.
I just like to highlight and amplify something that was said, because it reminds me of another point I wanted to make related to this topic. So when you talk about the distinction between, you know, a 2-unit walk-up or a 4-unit walk-up that are often in our community occupied by families, another way of identifying the difference between even that classification, you based your classification on purely on building size, which I understand the rationale. Another way to consider classifying those buildings, not necessarily by size, but by ownership type. So where the building is in the name of a single individual or a private concern versus a limited liability corporation, a trust, or a housing corporation. So it's just something else that we can consider if we want to take that note.
Doesn't mean though that just because you're in an LLC or trust that it's not an individual, they do that for liability purposes.
Absolutely. I'm simply suggesting it's something else that we could theoretically consider.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Shelley Pat. I've been a resident of Skokie for 21 years. And in this whole planning process, I know it's been housing for people with disabilities has been mentioned, but I really want to emphasize that because I'm not really sure that 19% figure that keeps coming up is taking that into account. Especially since so much of the housing stock in Skokie is old stock that was built before the Fair Housing Act put requirements on multifamily housing to be accessible. Very few of the existing units in Skokie are wheelchair accessible. In multifamily buildings, very few rentals are wheelchair accessible, whether it is these 2 or 4 unit buildings that were just talked about that have stairs inside. Even as you drive around, as I have looking for housing for family members, if you drive up and down Niles Center Road and Skokie Boulevard and Grosse Pointe and building after building that, looks like there's a ground level entrance, but there are 2 stairs before you get in. And as longtime residents of Skokie age and become less mobile, they're often forced to leave our community because our buildings are built in a way that they just can't get inside. Or for the ones that do have elevators, the hallways are too narrow for a wheelchair, or the bathrooms are inaccessible and don't provide enough room to even turn a wheelchair around in a bathroom. And the cheapest accessible apartments are those old housing stock. And then there are all of these wonderful, beautiful new buildings that are priced completely out of range. And I really appreciate, Peter, what you had said about encouraging, or at least not disincentivizing people making modifications in their own homes. But the average income of a disabled resident of Skokie is just over $32,000. So the average person with disabilities, probably even if they have the luxury of owning their own home, cannot afford those accommodations. And the quoted 19% statistic also leaves out, as mentioned, housing for families with children, since we don't know, and I hope that the Plan Commission will look into this in the study. Are these units studios and one bedrooms? Where are they located? Are they quality ones, or are these the basement garden apartments that a family that has children wouldn't be able to fit into? As already mentioned, the average apartment rent in Skokie is $1,795 a month, which requires an income over $70,000 a year. And I know I'm repeating it, but that is really important to remember, because that means that half the people living in Skokie can't afford that rent. And as already mentioned, these are the people who are working in Skokie. And lots of times, as a conversation about affordable housing comes up and talking about, well, who are we doing this for? There's also the people who want to come here, because all the people who came to Skokie lived somewhere else first and came here because Skokie was affordable to them and because Skokie was welcoming to them. And when we think about all of the work we're putting into to try and keep our stores and our restaurants viable, and heard many discussions at village board meetings about how vital Old Orchard is to our community and our economic viability, I'd question, well, the people who are working in the restaurants and stores there, we're not making it possible for them to live here. And so thank you for addressing this really important topic. But I'd really like to emphasize that we need to make sure that we're talking about what affordability is and affordability for whom.
Good evening, Commission. My name is Nia Tavalaris, and I actually work for Connections for the Homeless, but I also live in the Laurel Park neighborhood of Skokie with my family, including my 3 kids who are all at District 69 schools. I am incredibly proud to live in Skokie. I love the diversity. I love our functioning city government. I love our libraries and our schools, our park district and our summer camps, and I can go on and on. As a child of an immigrant, I also love how we are home to so many new families from around the world. But we do have a growing problem in Skokie, which is no surprise to anyone in this room. It's also the same problem that's growing across the country, and we are losing our affordable housing. Nationally, rents are increasing by more than 30%. Families and individuals are getting priced out. And those new immigrants that we pride ourselves on welcoming and accepting in our community, they are going to be fewer and fewer. That young family that has had enough of the city and they want a yard and they want great schools and an amazing library is getting harder and harder for them to get started here. Our teachers at Tot Learning Center, our nursing aides at the hospital, our entrepreneurs on Oakton. If this board does not take action soon, we will lose what makes us love our community. In calendar year 2022, Connections for the Homeless served 312 people from Skokie. We're based in Evanston, but we serve people across 52 communities. 2/3 of those folks, 205 people, came to us because they could no longer afford their housing. They were seeking assistance to help them stay in their homes and avoid homelessness. We provided those individuals with eviction prevention dollars, or rental assistance, is what it's also known as, and kept those families in their homes. We work with our school districts and with many of our nonprofit partners here in the village. It is true that Skokie has a good percentage of affordable housing, although maybe not 19%. We shall see. But this is not enough. Whatever the amount is, we know that it's not enough. And the problem is getting worse, and without deliberate effort and intention, it will continue to. Joining Forces for Affordable Housing was started by Connections for the Homeless several years ago. It helps communities harness the will and the desire to increase supply of affordable housing. Joining Forces members learn what makes affordable housing affordable. They learn how policies in their communities can impact affordable housing and how to advocate for more affordability, less policies and practices that increase housing costs. Joining Forces is very supportive of the village's intent to look at the shortage of affordable housing in Skokie and encourages the development of a plan that includes many of the components that Johanna put forth, especially the requirements and incentives to include affordable units in all new multifamily residential developments. Also, we would encourage the village board to consider reviewing the zoning codes and those building codes that Charlie mentioned to eliminate restrictions that increase housing costs and perpetuate racial and social and socioeconomic inequality. We encourage the plan to consider proactive plans. We encourage the village to consider proactive plans to use village-owned land for affordable housing with more infill. Last, while the village is looking to make long-term changes, we urge that you put some immediate guidelines in place around the development to ensure that affordable units are included in every residential development moving forward as quickly as possible. As a resident, I encourage the board to not let the perfect become the enemy of the good. We need to act now. We need to commit to this work now. We all know what communities without affordable housing look like, and we don't want to be in those communities. That's not why we're there. That's why we're here. We're Skokie, we are diverse, we are welcoming. We welcome you to get your start here. We welcome you to restart your life here. We welcome you to age in place here. And we know what it means, and we must fight to keep Skokie affordable, and we must add affordability at every opportunity. We can do this, and we need to. Thank you.
Thank you.
William Miller. I live in Skokie since I was born nearly 30 years ago. I grew up going to Tot Learning Center. I grew up going to Fairview South. I went to Niles North. I grew up here. I got my first job at Burger King on Toohey. And guess what? Do you know what they paid me? $8.50 an hour, the minimum federal wage. That's pretty bad. There's no way anyone at that kind of job could afford living here. The next job I got was at FedEx Ground. I worked these stupid early morning shifts, getting there at 2 a.m, and I got $12 an hour. After a few years, I worked my way up and I got to a management position there. And even then, it was still $21.50 an hour. That's barely livable in this region, still going to work at midnight, getting home around 1 or 2 in the afternoon. Some days around the peak rush, I wouldn't even get home until 3 in the afternoon. So that's midnight till 3 in the afternoon. That's the kind of absurd shift that you have to do to get a remotely paying job here. And that's not even a high-level education, but these are the kind of jobs that are around here for people that are accessible. These are the jobs which allow us who are more well-off to get things like delivery. We got to deal with the fact that people who, for example, Uber, Lyft, or DoorDash, they're getting around $500 a week. Plus, they also have to deal with their own personal upkeeps. These are the kind of wages that people are encountering these days if they're in the middle or lower class. And I guarantee you that all the numbers in the spreadsheets you don't see, they hide a lot of the fact of what these lower things are. And someone who grew up here, who's dealt with disabilities, myself, of my parents, it gets expensive. Medical care is expensive. These are very big issues. The reality is housing is not the only cost. Being able to provide a wide spread of support, whether it be transit, better transit, getting PACE, getting CTA involved, providing more transit cards for those who are struggling with housing so they can easily get where they need to go to. When you are getting new housing with affordability in, some things you can do include building better bus stops for them, not just the signposts, but an actual like With the Pace Pulse line, we have really good bus stops. This should be widespread. Those are what, 20,000 a bus stop for 10 years. That is chump change. We can afford this for our development projects. We should be pushing for this kind of stuff. This is going to help bring down the cost of living here in a way that can make it easier for people to afford. Another really big thing is that we need to get rid of curbside parking. It is a leech, it's wasted space. It's stuff that we can use to allow better bike lane access, which is very good for affordability. Or for example, adding bus lanes on high traffic routes to make the bus services more affordable and useful. Again, less time the buses are in traffic means we're paying our transit operators less money to run and they get better service. It's a win-win. We should consider signal prioritization for all transit in Skokie at the least, because that's good, again, give us big benefits in our transit. These are very simple things which will go along with housing. We should consider that all school meals should be free. That is approximately 10% of the cost of living for people under 50,000 is food. So
I appreciate.
finally, I want to say this. As someone who's lived my whole life here, Paul, Luke, you disappoint me. How you treat a lot of these other people here and how you prioritize corporate interests. It is very disdainful. I would like you to reflect upon yourself because the rest of your staff is incredible and you are letting them down. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Lauren Grodnicki. I live on Colmar. The last time we had a meeting here, we heard from several developers who build exclusively affordable housing, but they aren't the ones who go to solicit the municipalities. Municipalities solicit to them. So Skokie needs a coherent development plan. That way we can reach out to developers, entrepreneurs, etc., instead of waiting for these people who want to build luxury apartments to just come and fall into our laps. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jill Switkin. I live on Keating and I grew up here in Skokie. You're not gonna like what I have to say, but affordable housing is enough already. It's supposed to be 10% threshold. We have 19%. Ever since we've had affordable housing, the crime rate has gone up. I'm afraid to go out at night. I don't know if you don't care what happens in this village, but I do. You just gotta, it just has to change. It just has to. And I'm ashamed to say that I live here too. It's just that upsetting.
This is This is an exciting year for Skokie with the passing of the 3 amendments for electoral reform and the hopeful end of the Carvana Tower being built here. Now it is exciting to see Skokie's considering a formal plan for affordable housing, as we see so many high rises being a priority here, as well as the Old Orchard renovation ahead. It is necessary to formalize an affordable housing plan. We know these plans are necessary because the facts tell us we are seeing drastic increases in poverty and homelessness in our suburbs. I am here just to provide a quick view of the most important parts of a plan or ordinance, as I participated in the Arlington Heights process in drafting their inclusionary housing ordinance. First of all, a plan itself does not have teeth in it. An inclusionary housing ordinance is needed because it is then village law that developers have to abide by. An ordinance requires developers to present an affordable housing inclusion plan when submitting their proposals to the village and make sure they are following through on it. Illinois law has become increasingly attuned to making sure villages are enacting and following their affordable housing plans and ordinances. The state is also looking to encourage affordable housing by enacting tax incentives to developers who include affordable units. Secondly, the strongest ordinances currently are in Evanston and Highland Park. They provide good models to follow, but can definitely be improved upon based on Skokie's housing needs. Affordable housing inclusion rate should be at least at 15-20%, with a gross rent affordable to houses with annual incomes at 30 to 60% of the area median income. Just because a village has an ordinance does not mean it's a strong one. The importance of an ordinance also has to do with fees in lieu. These are fees paid by developers in the place of providing affordable units. There will be times when these are necessary. Fees in lieu make sure the village will still benefit by receiving large fees, which then go into affordable housing trust funds, which can be used for future affordable housing projects. Make sure these rates are set high enough to discourage developers from taking this route and yet can benefit the village when implemented. An ordinance assures that location, size, and appearance of the affordable units is done fairly. Developers will often try to put their affordable units off-site without an ordinance. In addition, ordinances can include tear down restrictions of some kinds. We know this is how we are losing so many of our affordable stock. A developer can also benefit from an ordinance when entering an agreement, often in the form of density bonuses and fee waivers as discussed here tonight. Even after a plan or ordinance is enacted, it takes steadfast follow through to make sure developers in the village are abiding by it. Ordinances ensure compliance more so than any plan will. I hope Skokie will take the time to do the proper research and come up with a solid plan and a plan that has teeth in it, such as an ordinance. I know Skokie's residents and activists will do a great job here working with the village to see it through. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, good evening.
Good evening, I'm Jan Bellotti. I'm a 35-year-old, 35, yeah, 35, I wish, 35-year resident of Skokie. And I won't repeat a lot of the stuff that's already been said that's been important, but I've been involved with Evanston's policy of affordable housing, and they have put a certain percentage of money aside for affordable housing, but I don't think that's a good policy because a lot of times they don't build anything. And what we need is affordable housing. We don't need just a pot of money and wishful thinking. Also, the comment earlier about having affordable housing is a terrible thing because we're going to attract scary people or unwanted people to our village. My husband and I raised 3 sons in Skokie on a very limited income, and we're not scary people. So it's very important to realize that there's very valuable people in our village, regardless of income, and having a lot of money doesn't mean you're more desirable. It's on your values. So thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else, please? Okay. All right, I invite you to come to our next meeting, to be March 2nd. It'll be our final hearing on affordable housing. At which point we will draft our recommendations and present our findings to the board at their meeting on March 20th. And as I said, anyone who wishes to be notified of any of these meetings, please sign up. There's a sign up sheet over there at the table. And thank you for coming. Stay one time and then start to get the hold of this. Have a pleasant evening and safe travels home. This meeting is adjourned.